Mom moved me out of the house at 8, to accommodate her new family. I took possession of the house. Here's the full story, pull up a chair because it's a ride. Today's tale is straight out of Dysfunction Junction, with entitlement, manipulation, and some karmic justice brewing. It all started when I was 8. My mom decided I didn't fit into her picture-perfect life anymore. She moved me out of our home and into my grandparents' house on my dad's side. Her excuse? Your grandparents are getting old, and they need help. But the truth was far more hurtful. She needed to make room for her new husband, Bill, and his 2 kids. Losing my dad at 7 had already shattered me. He was my rock, my biggest supporter, and saying goodbye to him in a coffin remains the most vivid and painful memory of my childhood. I was still mourning him when my mom introduced Bill, asking me to call him Dad mere months after my father's death. Naturally, I refused. I wasn't ready to accept a stranger into my life, especially not as a replacement for my father. Not long after, my mom and Bill had their grand wedding, a massive, over-the-top affair for a second marriage. While they went off on their honeymoon, I stayed with my grandparents. A month passed with no sign of her. When she finally returned, I was ecstatic, thinking she'd come to take me home. Instead, she brought all my belongings and told me I'd be staying with my grandparents for good. Her new family took priority. My room was handed over to her stepkids, and I was cast aside. The rejection stung, but my grandparents stepped in to fill the void. They gave me a stable, loving environment, and I owe them everything for the person I am today. After high school, I moved out to live independently but stayed close to my grandparents. Meanwhile, my mom continued her pattern of sporadic visits and hollow claims of love. It wasn't until years later that she admitted she'd moved me out simply because she needed to accommodate Bill's kids. Fast forward to now, I'm 24, and after working in marketing for a year, I've decided to start my own venture. To fund it, I need capital, so I plan to lease the house. Here's where it gets interesting. The house my mom lives in doesn't belong to her. It belongs to me. My dad, who must have foreseen my mom's plans, left a watertight will ensuring the house would be mine once I turned 21. He also made it clear no one could sell or lease it until then. My mom tried multiple times to challenge the will but failed each time. I can't help but feel my dad knew exactly what he was doing, ensuring my future was protected. Last month, I called my mom to inform her about my plan to lease the house. Unsurprisingly, she didn't answer my calls. When I mentioned my plan to my grandparents, they seemed hesitant. That's when I learned her family's current situation. Bill lost his full-time job and now works part-time. My mom's stepdaughter is pregnant by a teenage boy who's run away from his responsibilities. Financially, they're in a tough spot, and the house is the only thing keeping them afloat. Now, I'm at a crossroads. I need the house to fund my business, but evicting my mom and her family feels complicated. It's not like she's earned my sympathy after years of putting her new family before me. At the same time, their struggles weigh on my conscience. My mom's actions over the years have been nothing short of heartless, but her recent behavior was the final straw in a long history of neglect. It all began years ago when she moved me out of my own home so she could make room for her new husband, Bill, and his kids. I was just 8 years old, still grieving my father's death, and struggling to understand how my mom could so quickly replace him, and me, with her new family. Fast forward to today, I'm 24 and have decided to lease out the house my late father left me in his will to fund a business venture. My dad had been meticulous, leaving the property entirely to me and ensuring it couldn't be touched until I was old enough to make decisions. It seems he foresaw my mom's manipulative tendencies, as she had unsuccessfully tried multiple times to overturn the will after his passing. Initially, I wanted to handle this situation with compassion. I knew my mom and her family were struggling, her stepdaughter Brenda is pregnant, and Bill lost his full-time job. I decided to offer them 3 to 4 months to vacate instead of the standard 1-month notice. But when I tried to call her to discuss this plan, she ignored my calls. Left with no choice, I went to visit her in person, and that's when things went downhill. The house I once called home was unrecognizable, and so was my mom. Her greeting was cold and perfunctory, offering a fake smile and a half-hearted hug after nearly a decade of estrangement. Brenda, her stepdaughter, gave me an openly hostile glare as if I were there to cause trouble. It was clear I wasn't welcome. Despite the cold reception, I decided to temporarily shelve my plan and explore other ways to fund my business. But my mom's narcissistic behavior reached new heights during my father's 15th death anniversary. I organized a prayer ceremony to honor him, inviting friends, family, and even my mom via email. She ignored the email entirely. Hoping it was a mistake, I visited her again to personally invite her. This time, Brenda answered the door with no greeting, only a snide remark asking why I was back. When I explained the reason for my visit, she openly mocked me, saying I needed to get over it, and that my dad's death was ancient history. Her insensitivity infuriated me, but I left a note for my mom anyway. When my mom finally called the next day, I told her about the ceremony. She flatly declined, claiming she had to take Brenda to a checkup. I was stunned, not even a polite, "I'll try," or acknowledgement of the significance of the day. Her blatant disregard for my feelings led to a heated exchange where I sarcastically pointed out how little we seemed to matter to her compared to her new family. Her response? To call me insensitive like my father. That was the breaking point. Her dismissive attitude toward my father, coupled with her lack of remorse for abandoning me, pushed me over the edge. I reminded her of how quickly she had moved on after my dad's death, telling her she wasn't welcome at the ceremony. That same day, I hired a lawyer to start the eviction process. It took 15 days for my dad's will to be validated and the legal notice to be sent. As expected, the eviction notice sent my mom into a frenzy. She left me a string of angry voicemails, accusing me of seeking revenge for her skipping my dad's prayer ceremony. I couldn't help but laugh at her outrage before promptly blocking her. When she couldn't reach me, she took her theatrics to my grandparents' house, demanding they intervene. My grandparents, ever the calm and reasonable duo, told her the truth: it's my property, and the decision is entirely mine. This didn't sit well with her. She accused them of raising me to be entitled, which is ironic given how she's acted over the years. When I asked my grandparents why they didn't call her out, they simply said they didn't want to engage with someone like her. Unlike my grandparents, I wasn't in the mood to hold back. I was determined to make her leave, even considering evicting her immediately since she wasn't paying rent and I was covering the property taxes. However, my grandparents, being the compassionate people they are, convinced me to give her and her family 1 month to vacate, citing the unborn baby as a reason to show leniency. Reluctantly, I agreed. The next day, my mom tried calling me, but I ignored her calls, just as she had ignored mine. When she messaged saying it was urgent, I told her to meet me at my grandparents' house during a time that suited me. Predictably, this didn't go over well. She accused me of being manipulative and trying to throw my weight around, but I left her long-winded message unanswered. She should have realized by now that I wasn't giving in to her demands. When she finally came to meet me, I made her wait an hour before seeing her. She sat in silence, visibly annoyed, but tried to maintain her composure. She started by asking, "What's this notice about?" I responded with sarcasm, suggesting she read it herself. She threw the notice at me, declaring she wouldn't vacate the house just because of some stupid piece of paper. Calmly, I pointed out the legal repercussions of ignoring a court order. That's when she played the "I gave birth to you" card and tried to claim the house as her husband's property. Hearing her refer to my dad as her husband, after all she had done, was the final straw. I reminded her of how quickly she moved on after his death and skipped his prayer ceremony, telling her she didn't deserve to stay in his house. The argument escalated, and she stormed out, declaring she would have her lawyer handle things. I told her to go ahead, we still have 20 days to sort this out. Now, it's just a matter of waiting to see what tricks she tries to pull. Despite the tension, I can't help but feel some satisfaction. The eviction notice is my way of standing up to years of neglect and manipulation. Watching her squirm as reality sets in feels like long overdue justice. From the moment she replaced her late husband with a new one before the ink on his eulogy had dried, my mother made it clear where her priorities lay. Kicking me out of my own home to make space for her new family was just the beginning. She treated me with cold indifference when I needed her most, leaving my grandparents to raise me while she played house with her new husband. But now, the tables have turned, and it's time for her to face the consequences. As expected, when the eviction notice landed, my mom completely lost it. She accused me of revenge for her absence at my dad's prayer ceremony and left angry voicemails, which I ignored. When she couldn't reach me, she stormed over to my grandparents' house, begging them to convince me to back down. My grandparents, ever diplomatic, calmly told her it was my decision and not theirs. This only enraged her further, leading her to accuse them of raising me as an entitled brat. I wanted to throw her and her family out immediately, but my grandparents urged me to give them a 1-month grace period, citing compassion for my pregnant stepsister. Begrudgingly, I agreed. Soon after, Brenda, my pregnant stepsister, started causing trouble. She stormed over, accused me of harassment, and played the victim card with her pregnancy as an excuse. I firmly reminded her that being pregnant didn't give her a free pass to cause chaos. When she tried to involve my grandparents, we showed her the security camera footage and warned her not to return or face legal consequences. My mom wasn't far behind, defending Brenda and accusing me of abuse. She even threatened to sue me. I calmly reminded her that the court would easily dismiss her baseless claims, especially with the camera footage as evidence. Realizing she couldn't win through threats, she resorted to tears and self-pity, claiming she had failed as a mother because I'd turned out so selfish. She even blamed my father for dying young and leaving her to raise me alone. That was the final straw. I told her the truth, she hadn't raised me at all. My grandparents did, and they did a great job. I also pointed out how poorly she had raised Brenda, considering her teen pregnancy. Though I knew I'd crossed a line, I wasn't sorry. I simply reiterated my stance. I needed the house to fund my business, and they needed to leave. Instead of leaving, her husband, Bill, tried to intimidate me. He sent a voicemail threatening to physically assault me if I showed up again. My grandparents warned me he was a bully, but I had no intention of dealing with him myself. His voicemail provided all the evidence I needed to involve the authorities. On the day of the eviction, I went to the police station and filed a complaint about the threats. My lawyer convinced the cops to accompany us to ensure everything went smoothly. When we arrived at the house, Bill came out wielding a hockey stick, but he quickly retreated when he saw the police. The officers presented the eviction notice and told them to leave immediately. They were so confident I wouldn't follow through that they hadn't even packed their belongings. The cops asked if I could grant them a month's extension to vacate. Without hesitation, I firmly said, no way, especially after all the threats I had endured. They tried to play the sympathy card, using Brenda's pregnancy as an excuse for more time. Still, I stood my ground and insisted they leave immediately. The officers glanced at me as if I were being harsh, but I reminded myself this was the legal route, and their opinions didn't matter. They attempted to negotiate for a day, but I cut it down to 3 hours. The bitterness on their faces was almost comical. Bill even tried to intimidate me with a threatening glare and a shoulder brush, but the cops quickly stepped in and barked, "Start packing." With heavy reluctance, they began hastily throwing their belongings together. The police instructed them to hand over the keys at the station, where I would collect them later. To expedite the process and avoid further hassle, we paid the cops a little extra. My lawyer also advised me to obtain a restraining order to ensure they couldn't return to harass me or future tenants. The restraining order was issued immediately, and the officers sternly warned them about the consequences of violating it. The look of defeat on their faces was priceless. Finally, the house was mine, and I wasted no time listing it for lease. I'm hopeful to secure a good deal and kick-start my business soon. Enough with dealing with toxic, manipulative people, I'm ready to move forward. This will likely be my last update unless they try to stir up more drama. Thank you all for your support throughout this ordeal. From my mom's pitiful attempts at guilt-tripping, to Brenda waving her pregnancy around as a free pass, and Bill's laughable threats, I've seen it all. A special shout out to my lawyer for turning this eviction into a masterclass in legal triumph. And as for my mom and her dysfunctional crew, they've learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone armed with justice, determination, and a solid legal team. What do you think about this? Share them with us in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next video drops.